Anger erupts across Israel after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sacks his defense minister for challenging a controversial judicial reform plan.
The EU threatens further sanctions against Russia after President Vladimir Putin announces plans to move nuclear weapons to neighbouring Belarus.
Tens of thousands of Israelis poured onto the streets of cities across the country on Sunday night in an outburst of anger. It followed the sacking of Israel's defense minister by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for challenging the leader's judicial overhaul plan. Protesters in Tel Aviv blocked a main highway and lit large bonfires, while police scuffled with crowds outside Netanyahu's private home in Jerusalem. In a brief televised statement on Saturday, the now former defense minister Yoav Gallant had warned that weeks of protests to the judicial plan were a security threat and should be scrapped. Netanyahu's government is to hold a parliamentary vote this week on a centrepiece of the overhaul, a law that will give the governing coalition the final say over all judicial appointments. It also seeks to pass laws to grant Parliament the authority to override Supreme Court decisions with a basic majority and limit judicial review of laws. Critics say the reforms will remove checks and balances on Israel's democracy.
The US says it has seen no indication that Russia has moved nuclear weapons to neighbouring Belarus, despite President Vladimir Putin announcing plans to station such weapons there. The Russian leader's declaration during an interview at the weekend has brought swift condemnation from NATO, calling it dangerous and irresponsible rhetoric. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, cautioned Belarus against hosting Russian nuclear weapons on its territory. Borrell tweeted, "Belarus hosting Russian nuclear weapons would mean an irresponsible escalation and threat to European security. Belarus can still stop it. It is their choice." The EU stands ready to respond with further sanctions. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko is a close ally to Putin and allowed his country to be used as staging ground to send Russian troops into Ukraine last year. Russia says the plan to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus is in response to the West's increasing military support for Ukraine. And he notes that Washington has nuclear weapons in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands and Turkey. Ukraine has demanded an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council.
An explosion in Russia injured 3 people, including a 16-year-old girl, on Sunday. Russian authorities blamed a Ukrainian drone for the blast 175 kilometers south of Moscow. Ukraine has not commented on the explosion that reportedly damaged 3 residential buildings, 4 houses, and created a crater around 5 meters deep. The Russian state-run news agency TASS claimed the explosion was caused by a Soviet-made Tu-141 drone, which was reintroduced in Ukraine in 2014 after it was retired from service in 1989. Similar drone attacks have been common during the war, although Ukraine hardly ever acknowledges responsibility. Quiet train stations and deserted airports across Germany on Monday, as a massive 24-hour strike has halted much of the country's air traffic, rail services, and commuter lines. Workers at airports, ports, railways, buses, and metro lines in much of Europe's largest economy are demanding wage hikes in the face of brisk inflation.
Wir streiken für 10%, 10,5% mehr Gehalt, mindestens aber 500 €. Die Inflationsrate in Deutschland ist gerade sehr hoch und war auch im letzten Jahr schon sehr hoch und die Kollegen brauchen das Geld, um über die Runden zu kommen.
Millions of commuters and travelers are affected by the strikes. Many opted to drive, causing traffic delays, while those who could worked from home.
Well, on the one way, it's affecting my comfort, of course, but on the other way, well, I'm really not sure what's going on with their guys' salaries and other stuff. So, but I think like they have rights to do things like this, like half.
Employers have so far refused protesters' demands of a 10 to 12% pay hike. instead offering a rise of just 5% and 2 one-off payments of 1,000 and 1,500 euros.
Anger and disappointment at the Louvre in Paris. The most visited museum in the world has not opened its doors this Monday due to the blockade of the entrances by its own employees. They are opposed to the controversial reform of the pension system approved by decree by President Emmanuel Macron, which delays the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64. Last Thursday, the museum had to open an hour later than usual due to protests. Other cultural sites have also been affected. Police in Kenya are on high alert ahead of a second round of anti-government protests organised by the opposition that have been declared illegal by officials. The opposition is protesting against the rising cost of living and calling for President William Ruto's resignation, saying he wasn't validly elected in last year's election. More than a dozen civil society groups have expressed concern over police declaring Monday's protest illegal and have urged authorities to uphold the constitutional right to peaceful demonstrations.
Prince Harry made a surprise visit to the High Court in London on Monday. Harry is suing the publisher of British tabloid Daily Mail for alleged unlawful information gathering. Harry, together with Elton John and several other celebrities, are accusing the publisher of employing detectives to wiretap them in their cars or at their homes. It's a charge the Daily Mail has denied. In the early 2000s, a wiretapping scandal in which tabloids illegally hacked voicemails of celebrities resulted in the arrest of over 60 journalists.
Austria is heading for a drought. Due to lack of rain, the groundwater level is worryingly low in half of the country, especially in the east, where the Zixi Lake has dried up completely. Some residents are making the best of the situation, pursuing new hobbies, such as searching for coins and jewellery. But they are still in shock about the thousands of fish that died a few months ago.
Man hat gewusst, dass der austrocknet. Wenn man das früher gemacht hat, haben wir da sehr viel Fisch retten können eigentlich. Und das war verheerend. Da sind Container gestanden, da sind sie mit Bagger gefahren und haben die toten Fische rein und haben es fortgeführt.
Normalerweise müsste hier in den Alpen momentan viel mehr Schnee liegen. In Westösterreich gab es in diesem Winter um ein Drittel weniger Niederschlag, dort drüben in Italien sogar um die Hälfte weniger. Und das hat schwerwiegende Konsequenzen für weite Teile Europas.
Wir erwarten eine deutlich geringere Schneeschmelze, weniger Schmelzwasser, das den Flüssen zugeführt wird und dann mitunter eine drohende Niederwassersituation in den kommenden Wochen und Monaten. Ja, wenn wir jetzt in den nächsten Wochen ergiebige Niederschläge messen würden, wie mit diesem Messgerät hier, wäre das fürs Grundwasser noch keine Entspannung. Hierzu müsste es über Wochen und Monate deutlich mehr regnen, um hier die Grundwasserspeicher wieder deutlich aufzufüllen.
The Austrian government wants to invest more in the drinking water infrastructure, such as deeper wells to secure the water supply for the population.
This was the culmination of a years-long campaign by a grassroots movement to push Berlin's goal of becoming carbon neutral to 2030. But that failed in a referendum on Sunday. Nearly 51% of voters supported the proposal, but the referendum needed 25% of eligible voters to cast a ballot for it to succeed. Preliminary results showed the yes side was more than 150,000 votes short. The weekend's rainy weather didn't help. This demonstration, organized the day before the vote, was expected to draw tens of thousands of people. Activists say they will now look at other ways of pushing a green agenda.
There's always protests, right? Demonstrations like we're doing right here, right now. The energy initiatives we want to look into are where people that live in an apartment block come together and figure out how they can put solar panels on their building, figure out how they can really generate their own power for themselves.
The Conservative Party, the Christian Democratic Union, is expected to soon lead Berlin City Hall. One lawmaker with the party told Euronews that he was against the proposal, saying the time frame was too short and the price too high. However, he said more does need to be done to deal with climate change, and his party is promising billions to tackle the issue. The city's goal is to be near climate neutral in 2045. 15 years later than what campaigners wanted. Supporters of the earlier target say they will continue fighting.
What I can do is like to support the youngsters and to make the older people understand these times are over, to pollute this earth more and more.
Those behind the campaign say they didn't just want to win the referendum, but also show people how to get involved in politics.
Making Berlin adhere to its climate goals, making it a more climate-friendly place, but also making sure that citizens are able to take part in climate policy.
Christina Jodowski, Euronews, Berlin.
Croatia's airports dropped internal border controls on Sunday for passengers travelling to or from the Schengen zone, a move that has been welcomed by the country's tourism sector. The Balkan country officially joined the zone on the 1st of January, but didn't lift its air border checks until Sunday in order to align the date with the summer flight schedules. Planes departing to or arriving from the area will now be treated as domestic flights. This means that passengers flying to and from European cities will not have to go through border checks, but only security controls before boarding the plane. The country's largest airport in the capital Zagreb has made significant investments in updating its terminals in anticipation for a bounce back to post-COVID tourist numbers this summer. The Schengen area is the world's largest free travel zone, made up of 27 countries, including 22 EU states, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland. Just under 2 million people live in one country inside the zone and work in another.